Good morning, and welcome back to another episode of the Mysticism Decoded Podcast. I am your host, Aleph Lev, and in this episode, we are continuing with the Gateway Process audiobook and analysis. In the last pod, we left off after section 17, and I said that we are about to get into the really fun and interesting parts of the document now, and you're going to be able to see that with the language that Lieutenant Wayne McDonald uses. His enthusiasm just jumps off the page, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Section 18, Time, Space, Dimension. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. I mean, I don't know if it's been simple and easy to follow, but compared to where we're going, he says it was simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. This is what I'm talking about. This is why I love Lieutenant Wayne McDonald. This guy is a wild man. He's ready to go ham right now. Now the fun begins. Gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram, which can be accessed in the dimension of time-space as we know it. To explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time-space is the next task which must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate what time and space are in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended. All right, so just follow what we're doing here. We are setting up the stage for how consciousness can escape the restrictions of time space and what time space actually is. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. So you think of time, you think of it as this invisible thing that just tracks something that helps you catch a train or watch a show, go on a date, whatever it is. But energy is a measurement of change. It's a measurement of energy or force in a certain motion. So motion means change. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations or space. So what this means, as I was talking about in the previous pods, whenever you look at the characteristic of Ein Sof, of God, and I'm saying to you that God is energy in the state of infinity, meaning that it is energy vibrating at the speed of infinity, which allows for a state of all potentiality. And it also, by definition, by law, means that it is in all places at all times, and it is all things in all places at all times. As such, it has no specific location, and it has no specific time, because it is energy at rest. Energy in infinity is also energy at rest. Therefore, it is eternal. It is outside the bounds of time. And because it is energy in infinity or energy at rest, there is no confinement of energy. And confinement is what you need to produce individuality and that individual frequency or sound as a byproduct of that confinement, that separation from the energy in infinity, thus has location. So energy in infinity, no location, eternal. Energy that has been confined has location as a byproduct and can be constrained within the bounds of time. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and is therefore outside the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, no location. So this is the definition of eternal. No beginning, no end, and no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out in the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. So basically, God can perceive energy in motion. God continues to perceive the universe. And by God, of course, I mean that energy in the state of infinity. But it's not the same vice versa. Energy in motion or confined energy is not able to perceive energy in infinity the way it does us, so to speak, because energy in infinity does not produce a hologram. Energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in its absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe, so this is saying between God and where we live, our material reality, our four-dimensional reality of length, width, height, and time that we're familiar with. Alright, so let's read this again. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we experience our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capability until it reaches the dimension of the absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. So what this is saying here is between energy and infinity and the reality that we're familiar with exists other dimensions. And as I write about in my book, Connect to Source, that compares this gateway process document to the first book of Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. It has a sentence in the Sefer Yetzirah, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, where we know we are discussing the genesis of the universe. So 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. This is an obvious allusion to the amount of dimensions that exist in the universe. So these intervening dimensions, like I said, length, width, height, time, those are the first four. The fifth dimension, which I believe is described partially in this document, but more specifically in the Sefer Yetzirah, in which I write about this and connect to it. So we have an understanding as to what that is, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but we'll get into it later in this document and even more once I start covering the Sefer Yetzirah and my book more specifically. But we have a good idea of the first 5 dimensions, or more than a good idea. I would say it's a certainty. In T.B. Palicki's book, How to Explore Higher Dimensions of Space and Time, he goes through the first 4, and then the 5th, which I do use a good amount of technical details and scientific theory from How to Explore Higher Dimensions of Space and Time to help connect what the 5th dimension is in the Sefer Yetzirah to this document. And then Palicki lays out the 6th dimension as the dimension of scale, which is size. We have big, we have small. So he has the 6th dimension as scale. But we don't have any answers at the moment, not that I've been able to find, that seem credible or reliable or are described within the ancient texts, or the Sefer Yetzirah more specifically. As the Sefer Yetzirah, it seems to really describe the first 5 dimensions, but there is nothing that I can correlate or decrypt to say that these parts of the scriptures are making an allusion to the dimensions after the 5th. So we don't quite know. It could be that it exists in other books of Kabbalah or Merkavah that I haven't gotten to yet, or perhaps in other books of mysticism from other religions, which I'm not aware of. But the first 5 dimensions, I submit to you, are described in great detail in the Sefer Yetzirah, or more so, the first 4 are described, and I think actually not even that difficult to make the connection to. The 5th dimension is described in more detail, and I think that is, or not that I think, that's not a strong enough word. I believe, and I know, that's really the best word. I know, because knowing is even greater than belief. I know that the 5th dimension is being described in a certain way in the Sefer Yetzirah, that I am connecting back to this gateway process document, and we see how it is somewhat mentioned here without the dimension, without the label of being a 5th dimension. And then just to close out this thought loop, there is reinforcement and confirmation on what I'm submitting to you is the 5th dimension by an individual named Al Bielek, who is a whistleblower that was involved in the government programs titled the Philadelphia Experiment and the Montauk Project. Now, that is another rabbit hole in and of itself, and the way that they connect with the Sefer Yetzirah is quite astounding. But we're not going to get into that right in this moment. I will do future pods specifically on the story of Al Bielek, the legend of Al Bielek, and his involvement in both the Philadelphia Experiment and the Montauk Project, and get into also what is the Montauk Chair and how that specifically correlates back to the Sefer Yetzirah, and very specifically as well, the Golem, which, as I mentioned in my previous pods, is one of the most important aspects of the Sefer Yetzirah, where it is half about the creation of the universe and half about the creation of what is referred to as the Golem, that anyone who may have heard of it considers a mythical folklore figure. But I submit to you, it is not mythical, it's not folklore, it's 100% unequivocally real. The science is laid bare here in this document, as we will see when we get to the section named patterning. And this is of great concern to how to create a golem and why a golem is real. Okay, let us continue now. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capability until it reaches the dimension of the absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no hologram of or about itself. So I know that this section has been quite a mouthful, but it is extremely, extremely, extremely important. We are talking about what God is. We are talking about what time space is, and we're setting up the stage for how to escape them. And we are understanding that there are intervening dimensions in between. Now, I would like to end this podcast off here just because I really consider this section, section 18, to be rather holy. And I want it to have its own space, so to speak. Starting next pod, we're going to pick up with intervening dimensions and start to understand what it means that there are dimensions between the reality that we're familiar with, where we believe that we exist, and the absolute, aka the void, aka energy in infinity, aka energy at rest, aka Ein Sof, the Kabbalistic term. Ein Sof meaning no end, meaning infinite. And I submit to you, infinite energy, infinite consciousness, infinite creativity, infinite speed of vibrations, which allows for a state of all potentiality, and the characteristics of which have been partially explained here in section 18. So thank you for joining me on this podcast. On the next one, we're going to start off with section 19, intervening dimensions. Just like everyone else asks, please like, share, subscribe, comment. If you'd like to share the basis of reality with any friends or family, I think that's a lovely gift to give someone knowledge, enlightenment. And again, right now we are going through the gateway process and creating an audiobook. It is part of the infrastructure that needs to exist before I start getting into the Sefer Yetzirah and other works of Kabbalah and Merkavah. One necessarily needs to understand the nature of reality, the characteristics of the Creator, and why it is that our universe is equivalent to what people consider a digital computer simulation, in which anything and everything is possible, including things like time travel, wormholes, ETs, etc. But instead of a digital simulation, we exist in the imagination of God, where that imagination is brought to reality simply by confining energy to certain frequencies. Now, that's really not so simple. It's easier said than done. But that is what is going on here. The reality that you exist in is the imagination of God. And that is produced when God separates and slows down or confines parts of his body, aka separates and confines energy, which is slivered off the infinite energy. And when it is slowed down and given a frequency, it has individuality, it has form, it has location, it can be bound to time, and it can be made to essentially be cut off and completely forget where it originally came from. The Hebrew word ketz that we see in the Sefer Yetzirah is also applicable to this. And it's really just very majestic. I like to think of myself as having a solid vocabulary, but sometimes the words are still hard to find, especially whenever you're trying to explain this sort of thing from a technical point of view to people that have no context, to people that maybe have no belief, or maybe have always considered themselves non-spiritual. Even myself, like I said, before I started down this journey, I did not consider myself to be a spiritual person. I did not give much thought to it. But whenever you can start to accept and understand from a scientific perspective, a mathematical perspective, how and why it is that our universe exists the way that it does, and that it comes down to the concept of energy in infinity versus energy at rest, and therefore anything that could be thought or conceived is possible. There's no such thing as impossible. It's only a matter of thought and confinement of energy. Now you open yourself up to a new world, a whole new ballpark of potentiality, and you understand that all these things that you always thought were sci-fi are not sci-fi. And not only that, but the world, the universe, is not stranger than you imagine. It is stranger than you can imagine. That is a big difference. We are talking about the infinite creativity of the infinite consciousness that is Ein Sof. So I hope you are able to appreciate this concept. I hope I'm explaining it well enough to pique your interest. Catch me on the next pod, starting with section 19, Intervening Dimensions. Aleph Lev out.